All right. I'm Anya Grant. I'm with the planning department. I'm one of the project planners on this project at 2200 Homestead. We have quite a few people here from the project's design team. This meeting will go to about 6 o'clock. This is really just the first of several opportunities for the public to come in, look at the plans, with the applicant to ask any questions you might have, and we can talk about process. But I think given how large this project is, I'd like to turn the time over to the applicant and let them give the introduction to it.
Great. Well, I'm Dan Levine with Self Help. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Like many of you, I'm not as familiar with the WebEx platform, so apologies if it takes me a second here. And I'd say if anybody does have questions how to use the tool we're using today, please chime in the chat or interrupt the conversation. All right, hopefully, is everybody seeing a PowerPoint presentation now? Yeah. So first of all, welcome. Thanks for taking the time out on this somewhat chilly evening to come talk with us. I know some of you are familiar names and faces and have had the chance to see some of this before, and many of you are new, so we want to make sure we share the same amount of information so everybody's starting from the same point. So what I'm going to do is spend a few minutes with some of my colleagues walking through the overview of the 2200 Homestead Road project in process, and we will try to wrap this up in not much more than 20 minutes so we can have the majority of the meeting be spent just for questions and answers and comments as we go forward. Just to show you briefly, in a second, I'll introduce our development team and give you, through my colleague at the town, Emily Holt's going to give a little bit of background on how this project came together. And then we're going to talk through the development plan and where it stands today, as well as where we're headed with next steps on the project. And then again, we'll open this up to make it a real discussion. So actually, before I go forward, just to give introductions, we have on the phone, in case it's helpful for questions, all of the partners for this development. So we have a great nonprofit out of Raleigh called CASA. Jess Brandis is the project manager working with us closely on this. We also have Orange County-based Community Home Trust, and we have Lori Woolworth and Kimberly Sanchez here. They actually both have a board meeting to attend in about 15 minutes. So they send apologies that they can't be here for the whole meeting, but I know we'll be happy to hear from you if there are specific questions for them after the meeting anytime. And then last but not least, Jennifer Player and Richard Turlington from Habitat for Humanity of Orange County are also here. And we'll talk more about the different roles in a moment. Just wanted to let you know they are here with us, as well as the town staff we've been working really closely with. So just to orient folks here, if you don't know already, the site we're talking about is 2200 Homestead Road. It's about a 14-acre site, kind of a funny mitten shape, if you will, right next to the Vineyard Square development. And there are about 8 developable acres on this site, the way it's laid out, that will be mostly focused on today. I would guess many of you are neighbors nearby. But if not, worth driving over here at some point. It's right off of Weaver Dairy Road Extension, and then not far from the Homestead Road Aquatic Center and other recreational facilities, as well as down in, sort of towards this part of the site, the Seymour Center, Senior Center, and other county and nonprofit facilities. So a great location for people to live, which is why I'm sure many of you chose to live in this neighborhood. Just to, again, orient you, these pictures are a little bit out of date, but we wanted to show what this site looks like a little while back. If you've driven by, probably the main thing you've noticed on the right side of the screen is this old, not particularly sturdy kind of metal gymnasium building that has been there, I think, for people who've been around town for a while. It used to be a gymnastics studio way back in the day, and it's been vacant for many years at this point. There was also an old farm pond that had been created a long time ago here in the middle of the site. About a year ago, that farm pond was drained to prepare for this project. And so Wendy from our site planning team will talk a little bit more about that process and about what we're doing to make sure we protect kind of the remaining environmentally sensitive areas of the site. And then the other kind of defining feature As you can see here, this cut through the woods is the train tracks that ultimately go down to UNC's power plant. They're not any kind of passenger rail, but occasional, I think a couple times a week, freight trains that come through the site here. The edge, and then we have the Church of the Advocate here, and then many of the neighborhoods that both of you live in surrounding the site. And then finally, to point out, it was actually on council's agenda last night, there was a condo development called Bridgepoint that is right here between, kind of right at the intersection of Weaver Dairy and Homestead, that is under development and a little, or not under development, but moving towards development a little bit ahead of the schedule that this project is. I will turn it over briefly now to Emily Holt from Town of Chapel Hill, who's been a great partner for this project, since it is a collaboration between the nonprofit developers that I mentioned and the Town of Chapel Hill. So Emily, you want to take it here, and
Sure.
I'll for you.
Yep, thanks, Dan. Good evening, everybody. I'm Emily Holt. I'm the Affordable Housing Development Officer for the town. And tonight, I just want to give you a little bit of history on the project before we move on with the rest of our presentation. So this project, as many of you know, has been in the works for over 3 years now, and we're really excited to be talking to you tonight, having achieved the milestone of submitting our development application. So it's a milestone we've reached, and we're excited to talk to you about it tonight. So about 3 years ago, council dedicated the land for mixed income affordable housing, and that really got us going. And soon after, we brought on our design and engineering team, MHA Works and Coulter Jewell Thames, who you'll hear more from tonight, and got going with initiating concept planning and starting to engage the community and stakeholders to get input on what could and should go at the site. And then a few months later, we presented what came out of that process, the concept plan, to council, and got support from them to move forward. So we spent the next year or so searching for a development partner, and we excitedly executed a memorandum of understanding with the team that is known now as the Homestead Housing Collaborative, led by Self-Help, and three other local affordable housing partners. And Dan's going to introduce those organizations in more detail, so I'll save that to him. But so that was the beginning of 2020. We were able to formalize that partnership and start working on talking in more detail about what would go on this site. And so we drafted a site plan. We got feedback from council. We engaged neighbors and key stakeholders and others who had been a part of early visioning process, and as well as expressing interest along the way from there. And then we gathered up all the rest of the documentation needed for the development application and submitted it at the end of October. And that brings us to you tonight for our public information meeting to continue the process of getting feedback on this plan and excitedly moving forward. Just a quick reminder of the early vision that was set for this site. Once council expressed support for the project, we worked as a team and with our design team to come up with a vision, and that was a mutually supportive, self-sustaining, mixed-income community. And some of the key goals that were set for this project were to make sure that we were increasing the availability of housing for households with a range of incomes, making sure that we were reaching vulnerable populations, and making sure that the housing would remain affordable for the long term. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Emily. So just to build on that, I introduced briefly the development team before, but just wanted to explain the roles in a little bit more detail. So obviously this is town land, has long been town land, and like Emily did a good job describing, the town council made a decision to try to develop this land for affordable housing, given the way that fits with community plans and needs. And so they have been working with the design team for quite a while, even before Self-Help and our partners came onto this project. We did reply to the town's request for proposals about a year ago or so, and were selected for this project. Self-Help is a nonprofit community development finance organization based in Durham that for a long time had many members of our credit union and borrowers who live in Orange County and Chapel Hill as well in particular. We've been based in Durham since 1980 and do affordable housing and other real estate development work, as well as affordable mortgage lending and all sorts of other community development work across the state and beyond. And really, when we saw this opportunity, we were excited about what it could mean for Orange County and for Chapel Hill. And so we thought, all right, can we play a role in this really to bring together some of the strongest housing nonprofits that we know and that we've worked with in the area? And so we reached out to CASA, again, a nonprofit out of Raleigh that has done a lot of work in Orange County and Durham County, as well as Wake County, thinking they would be a great partner for the rental components of this project. And then on the ownership side, reached out to the Community Home Trust and Habitat for Humanity, also longstanding groups that have built a wide variety of affordable home ownership in the community. And we sort of put together what we call our dream team of nonprofits that know how to work together and know how to execute projects well that keep community interest in mind. And so we were lucky enough to win that request for proposals competition, and our group has been working together along with the town ever since that selection process, and trying to build up to where we are now, when we're really into the thick of planning out the site and figuring out what the buildings are going to look like and all the other kind of pre-construction details that we need to do. So just at a very high level, I won't get into this much because Wendy from the land planning team will be speaking in just a minute. But in general terms, about 60% of the units that we're proposing are going to be affordable rental developments, and that will be led by CASA. They have a specialty in delivering and managing affordable rental. They've done a great job throughout their portfolio working with people with disabilities, veterans, formerly homeless, plain old working folks who need affordable housing of all sorts. And so they're going to be key to that part. They'll also be partnering with a great program at UNC Health called the Horizons program that focuses on women with children who have overcome substance abuse disorders and need stable places to live. So they will have some of the units within CASA's rental, and then the remainder of the units are going to be just open to others who meet certain income restrictions to live in the community. And then on the homeownership side, as you'll see in the site plan, there's a mix of duplexes and townhomes that will be split up between the Home Trust and Habitat, and those will be targeting really first-time home buyers, in that case, ranging in income primarily. We'll get more to that in a minute, but ranging all the way up to kind of the low end of the market, but primarily affordable housing below about 80% of median income, which is affordable housing speak for kind of depends on family size, but if you can imagine families who have incomes roughly in the $50,000 a year, gross income and lower. And so as a whole for this project, we're really trying to target incomes that range from close to zero, so people who might be living on Social Security disability income or other very small streams of revenue, up to people who may have jobs with the university, with small businesses, but or to buy or rent in our community. So that's the overview of the developers. Again, most of them are going to be here today if you have specific questions about their program, but I just wanted to at least give an overview of how this is working and how we're collaborating together. We will be happy to share more contact information again if there's questions after this meeting, but here's contacts for each of the organizations if you wanted to jot that down, just so you know how to reach us. And so with that, what I want to do is to turn it over to Wendy Ramsden from Cultural Jewel Thames, who's been the site planner working on this. And she's going to walk through a little bit more about the amenities of this site and how it relates to the surrounding neighborhoods. And she'll spend a few minutes on that, and then we will wrap up and open up for all of your questions and feedback at that point. And the only other thing I'll say for those of you who did get a chance to see some of this a couple of months ago, you'll notice some changes that were based largely on feedback that we'd received from those meetings. And so I think as Wendy goes, certainly keep an eye out for those things that have evolved over the last couple of months. So Wendy, with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Great, thank you, Dan. Good evening, I'm Wendy Ramsden, project manager and the landscape architect with Cultural Jewel Thames. I'm guessing, seeing as nobody's calling out, that you can actually hear me. And I'm happy to see so many people have been able to join us tonight. This is a really great turnout for a public information meeting. This site plan likely looks a little different than what you're used to seeing on site, as the farm pond dam was breached last fall and the pond drained and is now gone. If you can see my cursor, it's in sort of that area here where the playground and
Wendy, I don't think they're going to be able to see yours, but I will try to point for you with my cursor.
Right, yeah, you're right. Sorry, I completely forgot about that. Yeah, okay.
You're used to having the cursor, I know.
I'm used to having the cursor. Since the pond drained, we've let the vegetation and drainage happen naturally. And in September this year, the state stormwater folks came out to the site to determine the resultant stream and wetland after the pond drainage. So these are the conditions that are now shown on our plans. A lot of the pond area has revegetated, some of it in wetland plants and some of it in upland plant material. But the jurisdictional stream area has shrunk considerably so that it now starts basically where the footbridge to the Vineyard Square area sits, that old path. So basically the old pond space now is partly wetland, but it also includes land area that can now be used for some development. And we have mostly used that space for parking and circulation so that we can join the northern and southern parts of the parcel together. So given the stream determination results, we did lay out the residential development taking into account the scope presented a couple of years ago, as well as comments received in early summer from some of the neighborhood groups and from council, as Dan mentioned. The project is laid out in a similar manner to the concept plan that council supported 2 years ago. The buildings might look different in size and sort of how they're spaced out, but the uses and the mix of apartments and townhomes and duplexes, the mix of rental versus ownership tenancy, that sort of thing, that all remains the same. The development shown is based on input from all the expected building and management partners who Dan introduced, so that we've got real building sizes and unit mixes incorporated into this plan. And as we advance the design, we want to stay consistent with the scale and character of the plans previously presented and supported, I guess is a good way to put it. One change that you'll see here is that we used to have the community garden sort of in the center of the project, and it is now a much larger area at the northern portion of the site. We've had some meetings with the Hope Gardens group over the summer, and they really wanted some separation for numerous reasons, actually. But the basic advantage of this layout for them is that they can now move their garden and reestablish it only once without needing to work around site construction, and they won't miss any growing season. So they'll be able to have a better idea or a better control of how and when they move their garden, and so that it's shut down for the least amount of time, and so that they don't have to keep relocating things as construction happens around them. A few of the other major reasons they wanted this northern space was to separate and have their own parking, to have lots of exposure from the public Greenway Trail, and have multiple places where neighbors could access the garden area. So it is still very connected to our proposed development. It really will just be a few minutes walk along that Greenway Trail for the 2,200 Homestead residents. And initially they'll be developing in the very northern portion, which looks like it's got sort of squares and parking and everything in it. But there's space, sort of the thin space that comes down alongside Vineyard Square. There's space there for them to expand in coming years. And they've got about an acre in total there. So Dan, if you want to go to the next slide, I can kind of zero in on the part that we're really concentrating on developing. So as far as the specifics on how the plan is laid out, we started with 2 set vehicular access points. Discussions with DOT have confirmed that the best location for access to our site for cars would happen in the southeast corner of our site, directly across from the Greenway Landing driveway, the existing street across Homestead from us. We're also working with Public Works to coordinate with the proposed DOT improvements plan for Homestead Road. And it now looks like those improvements could start as early as next summer. So we do expect them to be in place by the time we start building, and certainly by the time the buildings are being constructed. For the other access point, the town had received an SUP application for a proposed townhouse development just east of the site, Bridgepoint. I suspect most of you are familiar with that at this point. The location of the internal access points between our 2 properties reflects what was their design in October when we submitted our project. Since then, just in the last few weeks, they have redesigned the layout and removed the southern street connection. That revised plan went to council last night, and my understanding of it was that the plan might continue to change a little bit internally, though it does seem that the single connection point is the likely final outcome. So we'll keep these changes in mind and take them into consideration as we continue to develop our site design.
Oh, really?
Little side there. So we may be sort of tweaking the southern part of our site now that we don't have to meet that specific driveway with the neighboring developer. But we are in constant communication with them, and we're coordinating with them so that the two, there won't be a disconnect between the two projects. Let's see. So the building elements you see here have been laid out similar to the concept plan from 2018. There's townhomes along the Homestead frontage. The larger 3-story apartment style buildings are located more centrally in the site and sort of have better access to the common green space. The duplexes will be interspersed with townhome units and distributed along the western and northern portions of the project. In all, we have space for about 120 residential units intended to serve a target of mixed income households in townhome, duplex, and apartment style buildings. We will be able to provide about 180 parking spaces, and though they are intended to be shared among all residents, there won't be kind of assigned parking. The parking has been distributed to approximately serve all units equally and works out to about 1.5 parking spaces per unit. Will be, let's see, the stormwater mitigation pond that we'll have to install. It's expected to be located in low ground, a little north of where the old farm pond was located. It will be smaller and deeper than the old farm pond. The bus stop along Homestead Road, there is one there now, and we will work with Chapel Hill Transit to determine the best location for that on our post-development frontage. I've already talked to them a little bit, and so we've located the stop at sort of an initial agreed upon point, about halfway along our frontage. And we're showing a couple of pedestrian connections from our site so that there's really good access from anywhere in our site to be able to get to that public transit stop. There will be other community amenities built into the project also. One large amenity will be the public Greenway Trail, which will run alongside the railway tracks. It'll be a paved trail and part of the larger town Greenway network. And what we've shown here is the preferred location from Parks and Rec. That works out well for us too. It provides a good transition between the railway and the residential uses, and it allows for multiple access points from within the development. Though we're still working on how to connect in a couple of those places where elevations, grades are really different. So we're kind of working on the best way to do those connections. Related to that greenway and sort of pedestrian accessibility around the site are some nature trails or walking paths throughout. I know there are some pathways within the site now which are used by neighbors, and we're intending to keep many of those connections. There's one at the northwest corner of our property where people cross over the railway tracks, and that certainly will remain. And in fact, when you cross the tracks now, you would be on the paved Greenway Trail. There's also an overgrown footpath into Vineyard Square, which we intend to clean up and incorporate into the rest of the trails, including a connection to the nature trail at the proposed Bridgepoint project next door. They've got a trail that kind of goes around their proposed storm pond, and we'll make sure that we're all interconnected with that. The walking trail will also travel around our new storm pond, where we hope to add some benches and ornamental grasses and things like that. We can't put trees or shrubs on the dam portion of the pond, but we can add some meadow-like plantings and make sure that it's accessible for pedestrians to be able to walk around. Other amenities will include a playground for younger children near the apartment buildings and a full basketball court for older youth, purposely located a little way from the residential units. It will be on the Greenway Trail, though, which keeps it visible from both the community and the general public. There will also be multiple opportunities in the project for large and small outdoor spaces. For example, each townhome and duplex will have its own private yard. They'll be small, but they will all have their own space. There will be larger gathering spaces for the apartment tenants and all the community residents together. And these spaces will include things like gazebos, barbecues, picnic areas, some shaded areas with benches, a mail kiosk, that sort of thing. Everything within our project will be linked by sidewalks. And then, as I said, we have multiple connections for pedestrians to adjacent properties and the rest of the trail and sidewalk and whatever systems through the sort of the town network. So that's sort of a quick run through of all our information, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions at the end. But Dan will now talk about the next project milestones and where we're going from here.
Thanks, Wendy. And I think for those of you who had seen some earlier versions of this, like Wendy said, I think we stayed very consistent to the overall vision and concept, but we have, I think, made some improvements, including ones that you've suggested. For example, pulling some of the homes that had been kind of up about where the basketball court is now, pulling them down so they're really better tied into the rest of the community, making better use of that, and then also reorienting some of the apartment building here again, so it fits better with the community and fits better with the open spaces and playground here. So some kind of, I think important, maybe subtle, but important tweaks that we've made based on feedback to date. So just to wrap up, we are obviously in fall 2020 right now. Maybe that's obvious, maybe not. It's been a strange year. So we're in the midst of the submittal for conditional rezoning, which is the process that brought about this public information meeting, where the town is starting its formal review process and starting the formal public information gathering to build onto the informal public information meetings we've had previously. And so that process is going to continue into next year, kind of through the winter, with additional advisory board hearings and additional site feedback from the town. And then the hope, if we are on track schedule-wise, is by spring of next year, we'll be in front of the town council for the final hearing and for the decision about the rezoning, conditional rezoning, to move forward. And that really launches more in-depth design work, both from Wendy's firm on the site side, and then Jared, who's with our architect, on really fleshing out all of those details so that by early 2022, we can break ground on the site, which is pretty substantial work. And then from there, over the next couple of years, build out all of the housing. So like a lot of these large developments, it is we're a few years in already, and we're really just kind of at the starting line and have a long way to go, but are excited about where we are and excited to share all of this with you. So I'm going to stop there. If there's anybody from the development team who wants to chime in with anything I missed, I'll pause quickly for that, and then we'll open it right up for questions and comments. Jared, Wendy, Graham, etc. Anything major that I've missed? All right. Well, thank you all, and particularly I know some of you had seen a lot of these slides before, so thanks for bearing with that. But again, we wanted to make sure that everybody had the same background and same grounding and information here. And I think I guess I'll turn it over to the town in terms of facilitating how you want to handle questions and answers.
Do you mind just not sharing your screen? Sorry, it's really hard for us to see all the squishy stuff.
I'll do that.
So I guess I'm going to say that if you have a question, maybe just turn on your video and you can ask it. If somebody else is speaking and you want to speak next, maybe raise your hand, or I'm not sure if there's a hand feature here, but you could also do that. And if you are having technology issues and you're not able to use your microphone, you can also put it in the chat and I'll make sure to ask it for you. Linda, do you want to go first?
I have a couple of questions. I went over and walked the site, and there's a protected wetland over there. Is that what you're now calling your pond?
Sure. Wendy, would you like to address that in terms of what was there? Sure. and how that process works?
Sure. No, the pond is not going in the wetland area. The wetland area, we don't have the plan up, but you may have noticed that there was between where the water comes out from underneath the railway track and where the dam of the pond is right now, that area on the plan we've mostly left green. That is the wetland area,
and it will be left alone.
Well, not entirely. We will have to get a permit, but we will probably be doing some disturbance, not a lot, but some disturbance in that area. And we'll end up putting a culvert over the center narrow portion of it and taking our road over top of it. So we do have a couple of retaining walls and a culvert underneath. It'll sort of feel bridge-like to get over that space. The other area where we'll be disturbing it is certainly to put the Greenway Trail in, and over that portion we'll end up putting some boardwalk in. So we're not staying out of it entirely, but we have tried to avoid it.
There's also on the Booker Creek watershed, there is a stream above the pond, and you said that stream has disappeared because you filled in the pond. How could a stream disappear?
We didn't fill in the pond. We drained the pond. So all we did was breach the dam and let the water out. That pond could not be used for storm mitigation. So it was, more than an acre of just lost space on the site that we couldn't do anything with. It wasn't treating the water, and so we were allowed. We went through the state and the town and got approval to drain that. There was nothing about it that was seen as especially necessary to keep. So I can't tell you what happened to the stream from the north. I can just tell you that the state has been on site. This was a particularly wet year. We really have had wet weather all winter, all spring, all summer. And they came out in September and determined that the only two stream areas were the area coming from underneath the railway track, and then the area that goes kind of from the footbridge that I was referencing, all the way out east, past Homestead, Weaver Dairy Extension. And so that is what we've worked within. And we've set up our RCD zones, and we have mostly stayed out of there. We have just in one corner a little bit of intrusion for disturbance, and as we keep moving forward, we're trying to reduce that.
And just for explaining the acronym,
zone.
Resource Conservation District is the RCD acronym. So essentially, more protected areas in terms of town code.
Yes.
All right. I saw Michael Owens hand up next. It looks like maybe you're having some tech issues, but Michael, if you're still there, feel free to ask your question. And maybe we'll come back. Who wants to go next?
One more question. I hate that.
Oh, sure.
That's okay.
Shall I go?
Sure. Lisa, do you want to go next?
Yeah. You make reference to the footbridge. I'm just curious that comes off of Weaver Dairy Road extension, and then is it going to be a wooden bridge or a cement bridge and it goes over to the garden?
No, the footbridge that I was referencing it's a very small one, but it's in place right now. I think it's after you go over the dam, there's a little footbridge that you can take a little trail up to Vineyard Square to their trails. And so that's the footbridge I'm referencing. We won't be adding any footbridges. We'll be adding, so what we're doing is as we take our road across the wetland area, we'll be doing a little bit of fill, but basically retaining walls with a big culvert so the wetland water can seep underneath. We don't want to pipe it, but we do want to let it seep underneath. And then we're just putting our road on top of it. So I guess it'll feel bridge-like because, it'll drop off on each side basically into the wetland area. And then where the trail is going, we'll end up putting not a bridge, but a boardwalk section so that the water can go underneath without flooding the boardwalk or without flooding the trail so that the trail is usable more of the time. It's pretty wet over there.
So how do they access the parking for the garden? Is that off of Weaver Dairy Road extension?
Yes, it will be a driveway directly from there. And we did get some comments from the town when they reviewed the project, and we do have to do a little bit more work to get some surveying up there. And there is quite a drop off from the road down into the garden area. But so it will be like a driveway that goes down a hill to get into the garden area. But
if you don't mind, let me try to share that slide one more time just so people are oriented. So hold tight 1 second. All right, should show up in a second here. Okay. You can see my cursor and whoops.
Yeah.
I think where Wendy's talking about, this is the access off of Weaver Dairy Road into the community garden where there is a slope here. And then Wendy, the footbridge, was that down? I'm trying to remember where that was.
Keep going down, farther, and it's just a little to the left. Yeah, it's in the trees, and it's an area that we won't be disturbing. All we'll be doing is cleaning up that, because when we breach the dam, you now can't walk over it. There's such a drop. I don't think anybody's probably walking over it. I know I wasn't feeling willing to jump it. But once we get the grading done in that area and we get our nature trail in, we'll clean up that pathway so that once again the folks from from Vineyard Square can take that path that comes down through their common areas and can join the path network within our site.
Wow.
And for what
One
it's
other,
worth, that farm pond is just that. It was not a naturally occurring pond, so it's
No.
kind of a shallow, muddy pond that had been there for decades, but was not part of the natural features of the site at any point.
it's like the one at the Advocate across the tracks.
Yes.
Can I ask then, on Homestead Road, when you talk about the Homestead Road improvements, is there going to be a sidewalk on the south end of the site that goes across the train tracks and connects? I'm with Church of the Advocate, so we have a sidewalk that kind of
Yeah.
ends the train
Yeah.
tracks.
So, I'm seeing on the DOT plans, I'm seeing sidewalk and bike trails, but somehow the plans that I saw, which honestly are at least 9 or 10 months old at this point, they kind of showed a gap in the sidewalk. And I'm not sure if it's because there's already sidewalk existing on the other side. I was having a hard time reading them exactly, but we, Emily and I have talked about getting back together with the public works people and just making sure that we coordinate all that when it comes time to actually DOT do any work, because we do want to make sure that there are those connections, because if the connections were really in place, you'd be able to walk to all the like the schools, you'd be able to get to all the trails in Carolina North. I mean, it would be just a little bit of work to make all these connections to so many miles and miles of trail. And of useful things like, as I say, the schools. And so yes, we are looking to do that. And I see that the sidewalk on the south side of the street is going to do a lot of connecting, but I'm kind of seeing some little gaps on the north side, and I'm not sure why.
And then there's that drop off from the road. It kind of drops down steeply to where the gymnastics studio is. Will that be like a slope, or it's just hard to imagine?
There will still be slope there. We're going to plant some of it. We are going to have 3 places along there, not right at that gymnastics building, but close to there. We are going to have 3 places where we're doing enough grading that you'll be able to at least, well, actually, I think I've got all of them handicap accessible. At least 1 or 2 of them are going to be handicap accessible. And so there are going to be multiple places for people to be able to walk through from the development to get up onto Homestead Road and onto the trail and onto the Greenway Trail.
That's great.
And if I may comment about the slope off of Homestead Road to the north onto our site, that's actually going to benefit the scale of the buildings relative to some of the neighboring properties, right? Because as it slopes down, your two-story townhomes with a pitched roof are going to seem less tall. The 3-story apartments that are deeper into the site are further away, and they're going to feel less tall due to the grade as well.
Right. Interesting.
All right, we do have a question in the chat. Will the Horizons building include people who are not graduates of their treatment program?
And I will, I think I know the answer, but I'm sure people would love to hear from somebody besides me. So Jess from CASA, who's developing that building, if you wouldn't mind taking that question.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jess Brandis with CASA. That question, what CASA is developing in collaboration with Horizons is a 2 and 3 bedroom apartment community. Our expectation is that, and based on the demand that Horizons sees in terms of their families we're working with who graduated from their program and their difficulty in finding affordable housing in Chapel Hill, they are intending to master lease that entire building from CASA. So that will be a lease agreement. And then they'll be utilizing that entire building for their families who are interested in having an apartment in that community. That doesn't mean that, there won't be any specific restriction on the building that would prevent Horizons from modifying that lease in the future if they no longer have the demand for the all of the units and want to master lease fewer. That was going to be an option for them. What we're hearing is that they have such strong demand from the folks in their program that they're looking for as many units as they're able to get.
But just to make sure the question is understanding, I think the answer is both.
Oh, correct. Yeah.
Just to get that part. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
There'll be about 32 or so. I mean, if I'm off by a couple, serves Horizons, and then about 40 or so other apartments that are not specialized in residents across the other two buildings on the site who will be rented. And I don't know, Jess, if you wanted to share about kind of Casa's portfolio of different kinds of affordable rental housing. Probably
sure. Yeah, well, you gave a great summary earlier in the meeting, Dan, about kind of who Casa really focuses on housing, and with our homestead properties, we're trying to keep a variety of unit sizes. We'll have 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and some 3 bedrooms in the Horizons building as well, so that we have a variety of households. Casa typically tries to focus on serving people who have experienced homelessness, people who have disabilities. So those we will reserve at least 8 of the units that are at our non-Horizons development. Between those 2 apartment communities, we'll have at least 8 units set aside for people with disabilities. That sort of tends to be, our model. And then we're working with, we've talked to different organizations around the community, folks from PACID, folks from IFC, to see, what are the things that their populations have in terms of unit design, and take those into account when we've been working with the design team.
And I'll just chime in really quickly to say, I mean, one thing that excited Self-Help about putting this team together is all of these 3 nonprofits are very hands-on and stay involved in the community. So Casa manages their own properties across the Triangle. Home Trust, if you know their model, they continue to own the land and resell the properties as people move out. They're still involved in the resale to keep them affordable. And then Habitat also keeps in touch with their homeowners over the long haul. So they're homeowners association, like a lot of communities, but there also be partners who really are here for decades and decades into the future, who are community groups that I think we all know and know how to find. So that's appealing to us. I'm a Chapel Hill resident too, and that's something that I value, is having developers who actually stick around.
Okay, we have another question. How far will the Greenway go to the north? Will it allow bike access to other roads or neighborhoods? There was a concern that there's already a lot of disconnected greenways.
Yeah, that's something that we can kind of speak to our site, but we can't really speak to what happens beyond the property line.
Yeah, I can tell you that the Greenway Trail goes to the very north portion of our property line. It is also the sidewalk in front of our project, and next door also will be 10 feet wide. So it's basically, the multimodal 10-foot wide trail that connects to the system, and that takes you over to a traffic light where there's a pedestrian crossing. So you can get to the south side, and so you can get to the trails on the south. I think from there you can probably get into the Carolina North, that Greenway Trail. Now, as far as where it goes to the north, that's up to the next people who develop a project and take it the next step. Either that, or oftentimes the town will make some small connections. And so I think the property to the north is owned by the town, and the property when you get a little north of our project and then to the west is the green tract. And so I'm sure that eventually there will be connections made there, but that won't be part of this project. We're just doing the 1,500 feet or whatever it is that's on our own site.
Did anybody else have any other questions?
One quick one.
Go ahead.
One quick one. I commend you for having this area with these different kinds of housing. You do have some houses there that will be for sale, that were supposed to be reasonable. At least that's what you said. Now, that apparently happened over here on Sonoma Way. I've only been here a few years, but my neighbors had a big discussion about it. And what happened was, when people went to sell that, it got sold to people who simply rented them out. They weren't owned by anybody anymore. They're just rented out, and some of the properties are not very well kept. How are you going to keep those houses that you sell from being resold to just people who are going to rent
Yeah,
it.
period. On yet another church-related dot.
Great question. And I don't know, Jennifer, do you want to start addressing that from Habitat's? I'm happy to speak a little on Home Trust staff since they had to drop off the call.
So for Habitat for Humanity, there are two things that I would say. One is that we go through, all of the home buyers go through an application and screening process such that we look at, again, these are income restricted, and so we look at their family income among another number of other things in order to approve them to purchase the home. And then in our deed restriction, we actually have a first right of refusal on every Habitat home. So they cannot sell that on the open market. They have to resell it to Habitat, and we put it back into the bucket, if you will. But more than 95% of our homeowners are still original homeowners in their Habitat homes. So we see very little turnover in our homes, but if they do want to sell it, then they will sell it back to Habitat.
Thank you.
It's very similar for Community Home Trust in that I think they have slightly more turnover in terms of living those homes, I think, for 90 plus years sold to other homes and other people who meet the income restrictions. And I know Home Trust also has a pretty innovative, in terms of nationally innovative, program for helping maintain homes for sort of it's almost like an escrow account that people put some money every month, so that if they do run into major capital expenditure over the years, like, you know, the HVAC system needs to be replaced, the roof needs to be replaced, that the organization has some funds available to support that for the homeowners.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Does anybody else have any questions before we wrap up?
I have a question, but I don't know if you can hear me on the phone.
We can hear you.
Okay. This is, how much is this going to cost to build this whole thing, and how's it going to be financed, and how's fundraising going?
Sure. Yeah, good question. And I do not have my budget in front of me. I know we're in the $20+ million range for the total project. Graham or others who might have the budget in front of you, please chime in with more exact numbers. For fundraising, a few pieces just to highlight that are great news recently. The Orange County just a couple of weeks ago approved a $1 million grant from the county for this project. The town of Chapel Hill has put in, also from their housing bonds, primarily $3.5 million of funding. So those two pieces alone give the about $5 million needed to do the very large site development. So in other words, taking this old vacant land and getting the stormwater detention ponds and the greenway and the streets and the infrastructure, curbs and gutters and sewer lines and all those things to the site. And then the individual developers, both with town funds and largely through other sources, private fundraising, state housing programs, philanthropy, et cetera, are going to be fundraising around the individual units. One big head start we have, there's a $3 million grant that's been committed by a foundation called the Oak Foundation, which is actually based in Switzerland and Chapel Hill. And go figure that. Who is very committed to the Horizons program. And so now that the town and county funds are in, has committed that those dollars are going to help make those units affordable for Horizons residents for decades. So we have a great start on this, and some partners are going to be leveraging, market debt and subsidy sources and all sorts of things that they're used to doing to get these kind of complicated developments going.
I guess what I was getting at was
it doesn't answer you.
Was the structure of it, because if one nonprofit is doing really well with fundraising but another one is not, is the whole thing going to be built at the same time, and then you worry about who's going to pay you back, or how does that work?
Hello?
Okay, yeah, good question. So
let me call you back because I'm at the tail end of that town.
Ms. Wells, if you don't mind muting yourself. So the idea is that hopefully the projects are going to align relatively closely. So we're going to do all of the site work at once, because it would be really inefficient to try to carve that out. but there is some flexibility, like a lot of neighborhoods you see come up. They're not all 100 plus units don't show up at once, and so there's the ability to do phasing where you could do, for example, all the home ownership townhomes first and have the rental houses follow, and it would still kind of stand on its own. But the intent is to try to sync up schedules pretty well, knowing that there are different financing sources, kind of myriad financing sources for rental and home ownership, and getting them all to line up exactly is unrealistic. But the hope is to have this development happen kind of couple year period to be completely built out.
Okay, and is self-help going to be the lender?
No, self-help's, our role has really been working with the town and the partners to do this kind of master planning exercise and set things up and do financial analysis and modeling, and then we will get out of the way and let the individual nonprofits do the quote unquote vertical development of the housing units.
Okay, so it's kind of like a pay-as-you-go model. They can't build a house until they have the money for it, or they can't build the apartment building until they have the money for it. Or
in a sense, I mean,
nonprofit lending, going through their own lender.
Yes, and I mean, short version, yes. So the site work that self-help will get going with the town again is funded, and so that's ready to go. And then there are different models, and happy to talk more offline if depending how far into the weeds you want to get. But essentially, there's some different financing sources from state, Federal Home Loan Bank, et cetera, for example, for rental housing. And there are second mortgage programs that the state provides for home ownership. So there's all these pieces of the puzzle that groups will be pulling together, as well as, private donations. So year end, I'm sure Jennifer and others would love to have a check in the mail here to help them do their good work.
Hey, Dan, this is Michael Owen. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
I emailed you this question, but I was just curious if the Horizons program has considered the fact that if they put all people in that one building who share a common characteristic of having been people with history of substance use disorder, and they put 24-hour staff in that building looks to me like an institution. And I know this property is anticipated to be zoned as a particular type of residential, but I wonder if Horizons has considered integrating those folks that are graduates of their program throughout all three of those apartment buildings, so they're not all put into one spot.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I will say we did, I know we traded some emails on this, and we did, through Jess, share some of that feedback with Horizon, so she may want to chime in. I mean, I am not going to claim to be any kind of expert in substance abuse recovery. My understanding is Horizons very much wants to and has had a model that shows this kind of mutually supportive housing where people living together who have commonalities, not just in their work to overcome this disease of substance addiction, but also in parenting young children, being in similar ages, women who are in women-headed households with young children. All of those things actually make them really want to have that community in one building, and knowing that they'll interact in the playground and in community events and in homeowner associations and lots of other ways with people from the other buildings. But they very much believe in this treatment model, and I think have a good record of it. And that's probably the limit of what I can say. I don't want to speak for them.
I can add something, Dan. Yeah, which is, right now, when folks graduate, we've had long conversations with Horizons about this for a couple of years. We've been working with them to find a place to put housing for some of their graduates. Because currently it doesn't, a family will get stable, they'll go through the program, they'll be having success, they'll have kids in school in Chapel Hill, they want to stay in the community. But if they're earning, if it's a single parent household earning $9 an hour, they can't find anything affordable. So this opportunity really allows some of those graduates the option to really just avoid homelessness and stay in the community that they've come to know. And have the option to be in a community where everyone else is in recovery with them, because that's of interest to them, that their neighbors that they're living around are also in recovery. But that's not to say there's no requirement for our Horizons graduates to live in this community. If they're, the hope would be eventually, in fact, that families are earning a living wage and able to move possibly into another rental community within the home or out in the community.
Could they live, if they chose, could they live in one of the other 2 buildings at this same site?
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
So the individuals would have the choice of which of those 3 buildings they wanted to live. I think that would be, from my point of view, an important distinction, because I would imagine within a few days, probably, if everybody in the building are people with a history of substance use disorder within that neighborhood, within that community, everybody will become immediately aware of that. And it may or may not be a big deal, but it becomes potentially a stigmatizing thing, I think. So that if the folks graduating for Horizons can live in the neighborhood just like anybody else could live in that affordable housing community, I think to me it would probably be better for them. Not to mention, it looks like, I feel like you might have a zoning problem if you try to get that building zoned as an apartment building, but you have 24-hour paid staff, and all of the clients that live in, all the people who live in that building are clients of the Horizons program. It seems like a misnomer in terms of how you choose to zone the property.
Well, Horizons has been operating their program for many years here in Chapel Hill. They're doing so in residential apartment communities where they don't have master lease in place, and so they don't have certainty that rents are going to stay the same year from year, and that and they don't necessarily have that stability for their program. So the interest in working with CASA was to create stability. So we were, instead of them going out into the market like they're currently doing, to try to find groups of apartments that they can rent, we would have a landlord and an owner that was more stable.
But Mr. Owen, we definitely hear your comments and questions, and we are going to make sure that we're continuing to talk with Planning Department on the land use or zoning question, and certainly with Horizons on the program. So appreciate it.
From my point, yeah, and the issue that you just acknowledged, that people graduating from Horizons would have a choice in regard to which of those buildings they live. That is an important distinction. I'm glad to hear it.
Great. Thank you. Are there, I know we're beyond the top of the hour, but did want to see if there's any other questions or comments. And then maybe on the planning side, we could close out just with some next steps on when future public hearings would be. But before that, any final questions or thoughts for this evening?
Okay, not hearing anybody. If anybody thinks of any questions or comments that they want to share after this meeting, I've put both my email as well as Jake Loman's email in our chat. So feel free to copy that. You can shoot us an email if it's, and we'll make sure the right person responds to it. So the next steps in this process is that we are going to be working with the applicant team and our internal review to go through the plans, make sure it complies with our requirements. The next step after that will be that the project will start going through the advisory boards for additional reviews and recommendations to the town council. You'll then receive another mailing notice, and we will go to the council in the spring. That schedule isn't available yet, but I would encourage you all to continue to check the project webpage, because that's where we'll be putting the dates of these meetings. And obviously check your mailbox, because we'll send you a postcard for the town council meetings. All right, and with that, I think we can end the meeting. So thank you everybody for attending this evening. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for good work.